Good afternoon, class. Today what we're going to do is transition from the block-in stage into the division of light and shadow and the base coat. So a few things that we need to address. So the first thing is that your drawing, you want to lighten it up. So what I like to do is take my kneaded eraser and just kind of skim over the drawing to lighten up the lines, almost creating a ghost-like effect with your drawing. The reason for this is I don't want any one line to be important or to stand out. So once I've done that, and you can see that the drawing, it lightens up, but it doesn't disappear. And I'm putting a little bit of pressure on here, so just keep that in mind. You'll have to gauge how much pressure you put on depending on how much pressure you put on your pencil when you were doing the drawing. Okay, so once I've lightened things up, the important thing to note is when you're putting the base coat on of the shadow pattern is that you want to make it a flat value. And we're going to discuss this a little bit more when we do both the value scale and the sphere, which is the next exercise. I think we're going to start it in class actually. We want to make sure that there is no variation between top, bottom, left, and right. 1. 2, we want to put the base coat in at the least possible resistance. So I don't want to follow the entire length of this leg because that's a huge line to try to create. So by and large, what we've discovered over time is that a 45-degree angle is a good one for the figure. So that allows me to go from this side of the head to this side of the head and all the way over here. Keep in mind that I'm always going to bypass the edges. The reason for that is that I want the value to be flat on the edge. I don't want to have this little jagged edge. So those two things. So base coat, flat, 45-degree angle. And this is a general rule. Again, you may have to change this up depending on, if you had a laying down figure, you may have to change that up a little bit. Maybe you'll do 90 degrees or something like that. Whatever the angle that you start with, it's going to be throughout the entire drawing. You're not going to cross hatch. You're not going to change direction. You want to keep it the same direction. And the reason for that is that we're going to end up filling in the gaps. So when we start off, it's going to be a little bit, how should I say, there's going to be a lot of gaps in between each line. 1, 2, it's going to create kind of a textural effect, so we're going to have to fill in those gaps. I'm not going to put any pressure on my pencil. I'm going to hold my pencil far away from the tip of the lead, basically where the number 2B is posted. I'm going to take my mall stick. I'm going to use that as a bridge so I don't smear my drawing. And it is important at this stage now that we're starting to do value that you keep your hands off of the paper. We don't want the pizza that you had for lunch to end up, staining the drawing or you smearing what you've done. We have a fan brush that we're going to use eventually in order to bond the areas. Some people say, why not use a stump? And I think a stump, you end up pushing the stump into the paper and kind of smearing, whereas the brush kind of scans over and it lifts a little bit of the value up. And unifies it as well, and also bonds that whole layer without putting pressure or burnishing the paper. Okay, so you want to start off, I'm using a value 2B, and that's a pretty good pencil to start with, depending on the figure itself. So you always will gauge, the answers are always on the model. So if the model is really light skinned and there's a lot of light, there's not a lot of shadows, you might end up using an HB or even a 2H. 2H is a hard lead, so it's going to deposit less lead on the paper. So that means you're going to have to go over it more and more times. So 2B is a pretty good starting point. It also allows you to get to the value more or less 4 or 5 is the value that we want to reach as our base coat. That base coat value is going to end up darkening down, and that's a rule that we generally use, is that we always want to make it like 1 key lighter. So each value is considered a key. And the reason for that, it's much easier to get darker than it is to try to lighten something up. and the value 4 or 5 represents basically what the reflective light is going to end up being. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to start off at my 45-degree angle. My hand is being supported by the mull stick. My hand with the pencil is just going back and forth, and then I'm just dropping the mull stick, which is then allowing me to slowly create the value. And you can see what I was saying earlier about these gaps in the line. I'm not trying to make it perfect. You can also see I can go right back up. As long as I go in the same direction, it's pretty easy to fill in those gaps. Avoid the temptation of actually putting pressure down on your pencil. Just let the pencil glide over and let the pencil, the 2B, do its job. You can also see that my pencil, the angle of the pencil, instead of it being this way, is more or less like maybe a 50-degree angle or something like this. So it's also reducing the pressure. And I would recommend that you clean up as you go. So I'm just gonna take away right at the bathing suit line and then come back in and start again. And in this case, I'm gonna start here at the right leg and just do one leg at a time. And then I'll clean that up as well. And if I was to say this is more or less a value 3, avoid the temptation of putting pressure on the pencil. You can see as it gets a little bit below my shoulder level, that's probably closer to my elbow level. I'm having a little bit harder time trying to keep the pressure light. Whereas when I'm drawing by my shoulder or above my shoulder, it's much, much easier. So keep that in mind. You want your drawing to be, the center of your drawing to be at least shoulder level, so you don't have to bend down or be in an uncomfortable position when you're actually putting in information. and we want to get a clear division between what is the light family and the shadow family. And by creating a flat value, we've created harmony. So we can clearly see what is light, we can clearly see what is shadow. I'm gonna just change direction slightly for the cast shadow, so I'm just going 0 degrees on this one. Okay, so I've got my base coat. I've cleaned up as I've gone. I'm gonna go ahead and bond that whole layer together. I'm going at a slightly different angle, again, probably 0 degrees or so. Going past the edges. And then I'll clean up. So you can see that it definitely pulls up some. I'm just gonna show you guys. You see, so on this side here, you can see how much it's like lifted up from the base coat. And then I would just take that all away. Again, I wanna make a nice clean drawing. Make my life easier in the long run. In the lights, clean it up. Now avoid the temptation of working in the lights. In this case, I don't have any information in the lights, so temptation isn't there. But in the actual model, you know, you're not going to get this information so reduced. I think one of the benefits from working from an artist's drawing is that you can psychologically start learning how to break things down, and each step we're getting more and more information, and so you will have this visual vocabulary on what it should look like in each stage. You know, the drawing is not perfect by any stretch at this stage here, but it's a solid drawing. It's good enough to move forward, as my teacher would say. Okay, so let me just clean this part up. Now we're going to go ahead and suggest the core shadow. Just gonna clean this up right here first. I haven't worried about any line weight. There is a little bit more line weight happening. You can see that the line is a little bit darker here. Comes in at an angle. Here it's also a little bit darker. Out the clavicle. Core shadow. So more or less the core shadow is going to run along the edge of the figure. Now this is a cast shadow here, but then it morphs into a core shadow. Looks like I forgot to put the belly button. Suggest that. So just along the edge here, I'm going to go ahead and put in a value. Again, I'm still going in the 45-degree angle. And you can start seeing that starts creating form just by doing that little step of introducing the core shadow and then blending into the shadow area. I'm gonna go ahead and bond that layer together. Okay, so that's how to put in a base coat without any variation and then put in the core shadow. Make sure that you clean up your drawing as you go. Bond the layer together and always check against the master that you're not distorting or losing what you spent time creating, which was the blocking. All right.